Everyone, can I have your attention? Can you all settle down? Can you all hear me? Okay. Those people who are outside, can you all please settle down? Um, Good evening, everyone. I'm Rohit Muzumdar. I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth conversation in the series of 2026-27 monsoon cycle of Sea Conversations. Since its inception in 2014, Sea Conversations has brought together more than 250 practitioners from a wide range of disciplines, including architecture, urbanism, planning, visual and performing arts, literature, engineering, the social sciences, social work, and activism, in dialogue with students, faculty, and the public at large. Sea Conversations has a twofold aim. First, it serves as a platform for fostering critical dialogue on the relationship between space and society, engaging audiences both within and beyond sea. Second, it seeks to expand the horizons of architectural thinking by encouraging multidisciplinary dialogue and exchange across disciplines and practices. This series of Sea Conversations are partially supported by the Urban Center Mumbai, and its discussions are free and open for attendance to the public both in person and online through our YouTube channel. As a form of practice, Sea Conversations are curated by Sea's faculty. They are curators and discussants for the conversations. Over the last 5 years, they have curated the conversations around thematic frames that pose larger questions for inquiry and dialogue. For instance, states of matter, drawing worlds, bookmakers, architectural practice in India, millennial archaeology. These are the series of conversations that we've curated over the last 5 years. So let me take a few minutes to introduce this edition of Sea Conversations titled Projections, Anticipation and Architecture. This series dwells into the analytical and creative project of imagining futures. It asks what forms of spatial and design thinking and what practices of hope emerge when anticipation is understood as a widely distributed and negotiated capacity in turbulent worlds, marked by deepening difference, colliding forces, uneven distributions of harm and risk, and pervasive uncertainty. How do architectural practices project futures, prospectively as well as retrospectively, from the spatial or the social conditions from within which they practice? So the 8 conversations that we have structured for this series of conversations alternate both researchers and practitioners, bringing both perspectives into conversation over the larger 8 pieces of conversation. In conversation with us today is Naomy Parikh. Naomy is an architect, co-founder of Doro, a graduate of CEPT University, and a trained potter from Golden Bridge Pottery. Doro is an architectural and design practice based in Ahmedabad that works across architecture, design, and curation. The practice approaches design as an evolving process shaped by site, material, construction, and landscape, collaborating with several kinds of people within the practice. Interested in how architecture emerges through close engagement with ecological, social, and material conditions, Doro explores the relationship between landscape, materiality, and everyday life through projects of varying scales. Its work seeks architectural responses that are grounded, adaptive, attentive to context. Welcome, Naomi. It is our pleasure to be in conversation with you over here. Naomi's talk today will trace the evolution of Doro's practice through the questions that have emerged over a period of time, gradually in Doro's work. It aims to locate anticipation in architecture by reflecting on the processes that have opened new inquiries in practice, especially through engagements with site, material, construction, labor, and landscape. I was just having a brief conversation with Naomi, and one of the interesting things that emerged in the conversation was new kinds of design projects that Doro's practice is kind of engaging with. These seem to be emerging on the near and far outskirts of large and small cities, where there are new kinds of design studios that are being set up. We've always kind of, over the last 2 or 3 decades, we've kind of heard or seen projects on the outskirts of cities that have to do with weekend homes. So that's kind of something that architectural practices are engaged in, which are projects that Doro's practice also does. But what Naomi tells me is that there seems to be a new landscape of architectural engagement that is emerging in the near and far outskirts of cities. So it's probably through the discussion, it's an interesting landscape to kind of think about and ask questions from the engagements that Doro's practice has been working with in practice. Vastavikta Bhagat will be the discussant for today's conversation. Vastavikta teaches at the School of Environment and Architecture. She's an artist and architect whose work focuses on the histories of suburbanization in Mumbai, spatial and environmental politics surrounding post-intensive mining landscapes, and climate change in Indian cities. So welcome, Vastavikta, too. So in terms of format, like every lecture, we'll first have the talk by Naomi, and then Vastavikta will act as the interlocutor to open up the conversation, followed by engagement with the audience. Those of you who are attending this session online can type in their questions and we'll pose them over here to Naomi. Welcome again, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Sorry. I'm a little nervous and very excited to be here at the same time. I think it's quite a special. Yeah, it's special to be here because I've always seen CE as a very school of great critical thinking, and that's why I'm nervous too. So, and I've had a little slice of CE through 2 people who worked with me in the past, Lohita and Dhruvi, so I've had a little slice of that through them also. So it's quite special to be here and presenting work. And probably in the talk today, it probably is not going to pose large questions on architecture and what it's doing to the world itself. But as a young practice, what we have faced through the times and where we see it now. And especially because for me, architecture was not something that I wanted to do. So those things, the linear thinking that could have happened in college was never there in terms of, when I was studying architecture, I never wanted to study it. I wanted to pursue textiles, and I didn't get through NID, and my father was like, architecture is the queen of design, just do architecture and then you do what you want to do after that. So I was 5 years of architecture, I was always prepared that I'm going to do something else after this, so I have to just get through this course. And I mean, again, interestingly for sure, but I did okay, like I didn't do bad. But yeah, so the whole premise of what I wanted to do as an architect was never there as a building thought when I was actually studying. But definitely, because I wanted to study textiles, the intent of making and thinking about making how things come together was always there in different ways and different parts. So yeah, so post 5 years of architecture, I did apply to NID. Meanwhile, when I was interning in Auroville at the Ahmedabad studio, we were introduced to this pottery called Golden Bridge Pottery, where Ray Meeker and Deborah had created a very beautiful space. More than just ceramics, I think the place itself did a lot for me. And that's when I think 6 years of architecture was too much. And then I was like, probably I'm going to take a little break. And that detour is not going to be a big detour. It's going to be a 6 months detour. And we'll see what happens after. So that makes me go to this place right after graduation. And 6-7 months here was like intense. We were off the grid. So it was intense making. The course specially was for people who wanted to build their studios very seriously and not as a hobby potter. So all of these things that you see here are places where you make your clay. So it's not a clay packet that comes to you, but like ball clay, china clay, feldspar, silica, there's a whole recipe to it. You pound your clay. It's a whole process of about quite a few days to actually arrive at a pile of clay. And it was a lot of hard work. So if you were not interested in actually pursuing ceramics later, you probably will not go through the whole process. And you basically learn how materials, like, you basically learn time in a lot of ways, like things have to be made, things have to rest before something else has to happen. So I think there was a lot of time to think, a lot of time to let things happen and not make them happen. So I think that was the learning from the school. And right after that, Dharmesh Bhai, whose wife, Rakhi Bhabi, was also a potter, and she was going to do something at an architectural scale, the ceramics at an architectural scale. So I was like, right now at least this makes sense to me, where both of these worlds can come together, and I'll help her do that for another 6-10 months, and I stayed back for another couple of months. And this was what she did at the Jawahar Kala Kendra, and I was helping her make these modules and all that. Soon after all this got over, and I came back to Ahmedabad. And I didn't really know. I mean, I'd spent 2 intensive years in ceramics, not knowing what I had ahead. I wanted to pursue textiles. I did my architecture. So I was in between places, and I think Golden Bridge had instilled a lot of passion for ceramics for sure. But at the same time, I didn't see myself pursuing it for good in terms of, because architecture had basically taught you to question in lots of domains. Like socially, even if you're actually not going to be able to make a lot of change, but it has posed those questions in you. And I think I couldn't relate doing ceramics for my life to do that, but it was a great experience. And I'd just come back, and I was showing one of my parents' friends that, I did this, and I was showing these pictures. And I think he was not interested in looking at the ceramics. And he's like, I see an earth wall behind it, and I want a jhopadi with that earth wall. And I think, and that's where the first project came in. And I don't know which picture was that, so I just put both. I don't know what he saw and what he spoke about, but I thought it's a jhopadi, and it's going to take a few months of my life till I figure out what I have to do. I still have room to do anything. And that jhopadi kind of became a full-fledged project for me, and that was the first ever project that I was thinking about doing. I mean, this is just a range of things, and I'm just going to talk about that first project first. This was our first project, and that's the jhopadi, if you call it. But yeah, so this was again in the outskirts of Baroda, and that's where, my mom comes from. That's how I met this uncle who wanted to build this jhopadi. And again, I think through the whole presentation, I've put these things as negotiations, as key factors of what the negotiations for every particular project were for me. And for me, also as a practice, it was important what the commute to the site is, and how often were you, it'll go through the project, but like here is like the negotiations are the first of everything. I didn't want to do architecture, so I've never paid so much attention of how construction really happened before this. And this came in, it was not even an extension, it was a full-fledged project with a 4-acre land, and one had to figure everything. And this uncle of mine had a background in civil engineering, not practicing structural engineering or anything. He's like, we will probably have somebody give us reinforcement details, but that's it. We are not going to have a formal structural engineer on board. And neither did we have a formal contractor on board for the project. But I think I was okay at that point, because I wanted to really do something, and I was like, I'm going to take it up. And I technically moved to Baroda. I come from Ahmedabad. I moved to Baroda for this particular project. Here I've written filling gaps because there were no formal an organized sector in place. Landscape and the terrain, you've never you've seen landscape, you've seen done things, but you've never interacted to build with the landscape first off. So that was the first negotiation. And the remoteness and navigation, so you couldn't really go to the site just by yourself, or a rickshaw or some auto is not going to take you there. So my client had very happily given me a small nano he had. So as soon as I would land in the bus to Baroda, I would take the nano and go to the site. Skill brought and skill transferred, because he wanted a earth jhopadi, and we didn't have anybody around who was building in earth. So we had somebody coming in, not specialists, but I'll get to that later, and binding with the unorganized, because we had the whole way we constructed this was a very unorganized way of going about it. I've just given a small map of like a bus to Baroda and then a nano to the site, and 4 hours one way to get there. But technically I had moved there, so 1 hour from home there, and almost every day and all day was the nature, because that's the only project I was doing back then. Yeah, so there was like a remote site. It was through like all of this was cultivated land around me, and there's a river. There's a ravine here. The water flowed through the river here, so that was the terrain of the site. Yeah, so the whole water, if you see this, the whole water moved through this part of the land, and the basic brief was how I said before, was a jhopdi. But again, there was a little addition, plus and minus, when it kept coming as soon as we started designing the jhopdi. And like, oh, we don't want anybody to enter this house. This is a house for 2 people. But we want to host people here. So it already became a social space and a place where we want to hang out and get people to things together. So other facilities had to be done around it, and like a part of farming had to be done around it. So this is what the jhopdi looks like. I'm calling it a jhopdi because it started there. So this is what the house is here. And then we built like a small kitchenette outside because we want to host people outside. There was a small kund that was made later. I'd come to all of that later. But that's what the terrain was, and that's where we situated the house, because there was a large amount of trees here, which made us think that, that's the perfect spot where we could elevate the house and it could actually flow into the land the other side, so it could just smoothly flow under the land here. Yeah, that's primarily what the plan looked like. This is the space here, so north up here. So it was a very basic, it's like a 1,500 square feet footprint, like a living space, kitchen, dining, because it was supposed to be only for the weekend and things, and a bedroom space, and like a veranda outside of it. And this deck basically here, sort of these rammed earth, these walls here are the rammed earth walls. And these walls, the length of these walls define the privacy of the space. So basically this largest wall here sort of contains the deck where you can actually access freely, and the bedroom here that you see is elevated. So there was no access from the outside to the bedroom, and this wall sort of cordoned the deck space outside. And this part here that you see is a cantilevered deck here, and the other part here sort of connects to the land on the other side. Coming back to where this was here, so these parallel walls as a system came together because we had an expanse on both these other sides. Not necessarily looking at what's north, what's south at this point, only because when you're coming to a weekend home, you're coming for an experience, and the experience has to be a vast experience, is what the brief was. So that's why we opened these east-west direction outside, and these walls helped doing that. And because the walls came out, the roof had to be elevated off that. So it was almost like a canopy under a canopy of trees. Yeah, so this was the barren, the land when there was. So we raised the building on the stilts to sort of access on the other side of the land. Just a little story here where, I had worked in Auroville, so there was a little earth that I had seen around for sure, but I had no practical experience of building with earth. Neither did the project come with a budget that could sort of get a very organized agency to do the rammed earth here. So I had a few friends who'd from the office itself who'd gone to Chhattisgarh to train for the Indira Awas Yojana back then, and there were a bunch of masons who were trained for this. They were given a training for it, but not necessarily building walls. So I called up that friend that, I need a per day labor only. I can't afford anything more than that. If these guys have seen how this is done, just bring them on. We have to do this, and I have to do it on a budget. So 4 people came from there, 3 people came from around the village. That was quite a social friction in a lot of ways because they came from very different backgrounds. I'll come to a story of that later. But what happened here was, as a normal technical thing, you can build like apply shuttering size of 4x8 size, right? So you can't build more than 8 feet if you're taking a very basic shuttering of size. And so basically in a day's time, you have to finish a wall in a day because otherwise it'll crack in the soil and everything will have a very different moisture content and things. So in a day's time, 7 people on one shuttering, 7x7 is the whole math to the rammed earth wall. And you have to, and we were working, at this point we were working off the grid. So we didn't have any electricity or anything like that would work in the night. So we had to technically really time ourselves. So we had done all to just optimize days and all that. We had done all these full 7-8 feet walls, But later we realized because this was on a cantilever, they took half the day to just build the scaffolding, which is otherwise a one-day's job. So we had to reiterate the whole thing to make all the walls smaller. Basically, it just added more time to the project. But those were things we learned on the go with the project because the terrain was such. Yeah, these were just some walls that were getting, and they were all on the stilts, so everything took time. So what I was talking about, the social friction, people were not okay. People were not okay working with each other, and the people from the local people from there had been given the job of mixing the soil, and these guys would complain the soil is not mixed well, this is not sieved well, and all that, and they just didn't work together because they didn't want to work together because they came from very social background. So I think I was very romantic back then that I can change the world kind of thing. So we were like, okay, let's do a co-cooking session, and maybe then they'll start talking to each other and all that. So we did that, but it didn't really help. Probably the alcohol after I left sort of helped the whole process, and they kind of, the next day onwards, we took a 2-day break that, if y'all are not working well, we can't damage walls, so y'all figure out what y'all want to do. And I think the alcohol there made the work happen the next day. So that's the plate that that's the food. So the next thing that came up was the roof. And again, since there was no structural engineer had given all the beams and reinforcement needles, but there was no timber measurements, timber spans, nothing that was given. And I didn't know anything. So we did study a lot of buildings. I went to Hunarshala for a bit. And I think back then, because there was everything, you had to really build. You didn't know anything, you had to build, and I was probably very okay asking 100 people 100 questions. So I remember back then going to Chaya, going to Riyaz, everybody. I think they must be thinking what this girl is doing. But I was actually going to everybody and saying that I'm constructing this, I don't know what's really going to happen. You tell me if this is okay or not. And we studied a lot of buildings through, and everybody was really helpful in that manner to sort of guide, show other projects where we looked at spans. And my client and I went to Alang, to the shipbreaking yard to get the wood. And then we came back. Before that I had devised everything in timber joineries and all that. But because the shipbreaking yard wood is very hard, so no sawmill was okay actually cutting the wood into parts. And the wood that we had gotten was the only size we could get. So it's not like we could have changed according to the section size. But finally we managed to cut the wood at least. But everything was devised again with a metal joinery to fix the things together, because wood to wood join wouldn't just happen. This was when the rafters were getting up. And I think when we were looking at this, till this point, the whole roof was going to be roofed. But, when I saw the trees all the time, and I spent a lot of time in this space just when the roofing sheet was not up. So we need a small sliver of light coming in. So that's the small cutout that happened later. And then we had a small cutout here that happened later. This part here and this part here and this part here that came in because we were spending time on site and what was really happening. Even for the floors, I think I had worked in Auroville and I'd seen a lot of oxide floors and all that, and I thought it would be very easy because it's apparently very local to do it, but it wasn't very local. Nobody could in Baroda do it, and I had already planned everything for it in ways the architecture was going to work. So this time a team from Pondi had come to help me with it. But I think with the team from Pondi came with a lot of logistics of what tomatoes go into their sambar, what sambar powder goes. So they had a whole specific requirement, not of what they were doing, but the whole list of food and everything else that the pillow was not too soft enough or whatever. So when people came from outside, there was another logistics that came to it. And because as a young architect that time, you are basically just filling in all the gaps possible. So everything becomes your job and you take it on. So, So these are the pictures when it finished. This particular picture is from the back side and this is from the front side. And when we were spending a lot of time on site because they wanted social space and because there was this natural depression on 7 hours from Ahmedabad and weekly twice and 4-5 hours each time that you were spending there. Again, this was the same client as the first, so again we didn't have a structural engineer on board. And we had never built in bamboo. But we would like make small models, and there's a professor in college called Kirit Patel. I would go to, because he talks a lot about tectonics, so I would go to him with all these physical models, and he would sort of help what will happen, where torsion will come, what will happen. So that way we developed a system, but we needed somebody to build with. And he sort of guided us to a person who was basically a furniture maker in bamboo, and he'd never constructed before, but he didn't tell us that he'd not constructed before this point. So, and he was a young guy, he was very excited to do this. Like, we'll construct in bamboo, and again, because the project was a tight budgeted project, the bamboo didn't come from very specific construction bamboo place. This is all bamboo that is available at for theka, like for the scaffolding bamboo, what you get in the local market is that bamboo. But we sort of had to structure it and bundle it in a way that it would work for our project here. So these were the cottage. It was a glamping place. So it was like a guest house facility, and there are lots of mountains and birds around. So people come, like ornithologists come and like do photography for birds, and like researchers come. So it was a place for them. There was a central dining kitchen area and an administrative block. Yeah, this was what the dining block looked like. This is the plan of the dining block. And that was what predominantly a cottage looked like. And at this point, I mean, in college, when it was always said bamboo, I would be away from it because I didn't like the materiality and what it did to a structure. But here we had to do it. So yeah, it was a love and hate relationship in the beginning to sort of arrive at it. But the people that we worked with, so this guy we were guided to, who was a furniture maker, he was from Tripura, and bamboo was his life skill. So it was not something that he was master in building something, but they in their homes would start adding up their house. As soon as they have a little more money, they'll add another floor, so basically it was a life skill for them, and then that's why they knew how to use the material to its fullest capacity. So this was the second day on site, and as soon as we got the bamboo, the next time I go there, everything was very organized. And there was nothing facilitated from our end. We didn't even know anything. So there was nothing facilitated from our end. But everything from the tank to actually treat the bamboo to everything was extremely organized on site. And that was an amazing thing to see. Yeah. And just because they knew their material so much, like whatever was not used in construction went into the roofing, whatever was not used in the roofing went into the wattle and daub panel. So I mean, if one had to devise this, I don't think it was possible to devise it at front if they didn't do it themselves. And they only came up with we are going to use this for this. So there was a huge optimization of material because it was theirs in full spirit. So this was how they sort of worked on the site. So these are the bamboos that are the waste bamboos from the structure that came and became the roofing panels. And this, whatever came waste out of that, they made the wattle and daub panels out of it. Yeah, this was when the construction was going on. So again, because it was going to be like a structure, an infill system, there was going to be an infill. And I mean, back in Orville at the Ahmedabad's office, I'd seen these panels that had come from Lalpur in Gujarat. And these are basically panels made out of earth, just made as bricks, but they have a lot more coal content in it to span larger. And these basically they use in Lalpur as flooring decks. Like with a plank and joist system, they put a deck on it, and that's how they use this material. And the main size of this is this. And just because of the coal and the firing is the texture, you get this texture because of that. And it's like a 2-inch thick thing. Because here we wanted to, my client was very open to experiment, and it was like a hospitality thing, so he was open to sort of experimenting with it. So we sort of got it customized to our thickness because we wanted to use it as a structure. We made it happen in 3 inches, and there were grooves and tongue and groove joints and laps that we made on site to sort of assemble this. But I think this, if you see the picture here, there were 2 fabricators, 2 timber guys, 1 panel person to just put 1 wall. And we understood that we already had the material, but we understood that it's not worth it because the fabricator had to just put 2 welding points after the whole system was done. So people had to just stick around just to put that 1 wall in, and we understood that this cannot really, we did finish the 2 cottages we did, and the rest we sort of adapted again, revisited that. But that was how the whole panels came together. That was a central structure. It was a cantilevered thing from truss from the center here. And this kind of was built in peak COVID. We didn't even, I mean, normally we would have done the plinth first and then the columns first, but the plinth masons had gone because they were locals, and the bamboo guys were stuck on site. So they are like, we are going to put the pile and put the columns up. So without even having to properly level the whole place, they just started, because they had to. They had all the time and the material in place for it. So they just started. So the structure is a little lopsided one side because the plinth was not done before and the plinth came after when COVID was off. I mean, these are still not finished images. The project is not finished yet. But yeah, these are bottle and top panels on the top here. Yeah. Coming to our next project here, it was in a different city, and this was probably a first more organized project, comparatively more organized project for us, where we are going to have a structural engineer, where we were going to have a contractor. And this was a potter studio made for my friend who was studying ceramics with me back in Golden Bridge. So it was a very special project because I could really imagine ways of doing things like her, like how she'd want things to be, how to walk around it. So this is in Kamshet, and this was in Kamshet. So basically like a Duronto ride to Pune Navla local to Kamshet, and a small auto ride to the site. So that was the commute. And negotiations here are ways of clay and ways of life. The unknown territory, I mean, it was the first time we were working in Maharashtra, and Maharashtra, like at least that belt has a lot of land and contractor mafia, which we were really unaware of, and we had to navigate our way through it. The remoteness and the skill-intensive methods, again, because she had seen the first project I had done, so that was the nature of work she wanted. So it was definitely going to be a skill-intensive project, even if it was a remote site. So we had to sort of manage both together. And the topography and the extreme climate. I mean, because we've seen that in 2 seasons, it was like full green and full brown in the other season, and Ahmedabad is not like that. So this was a very drastic change as a climate for us, and the ever-changing workforce, because we've changed 5-7 contractors in the whole process of the project, and the project lasted for 4 odd years. So yeah, so that's like a 12-hour train ride and a 2-hour local ride to the site one way. And here, because it was skill intensive also, so the commute at the peak time was monthly once or twice at least, and we would stay together for 1-2 days extensively to figure out. Yeah, so this, I mean, they had a 14-acre land. Despite of so much rainfall, they didn't have any water in their bore wells at all. So and because they were my clients itself, they had done their thorough research on everything, and they themselves had built a few water tanks before we started this particular project. They were already running a small school here, so provision for that amount of water was already there. But when we were going to build another facility, which was also going to be very water intensive as ceramics can be, so we had to first think about what we could do with the water there. So the whole project went through a round of how will we do the roofs and everything in order to also conserve the rainwater that we are going to collect on the roofs at least. And everything else as surface drain water would still go back to the same old tanks. I mean, this is just a small diagram of these are the water spots in the land here. These yellow ones are the 2 tanks. And there was a whole facility of tanks, like we built another 1 lakh liter tanks to facilitate the afterlife of the project here. I mean, and my friend Ritu, who I did this project for, also studied at Golden Bridge, had the same kind of sensitivities to things, and they lived a very different kind of life too. So we documented their house of how they were living. Her parents come from Kerala, so they had very different rituals to do everything in their house. Like the living room was not the center of their house, the dining room was the center of their house. So when we were going to build a studio and a house both for them, so we spent a lot of time with them looking at how they were living in their house also. Because it was quite different for me from where I was coming from. And these are pictures and plans from Golden Bridge, because that's where we learned how to work with clay. And that's what I had to continue there. Yeah, that's just how this is the studio and this is the house here, and that's how it flows down. Yeah, I don't know if I can zoom into this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I can. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at the time at Golden Bridge, there was a lot of space for nothingness. There was work, for sure. There was a space to eat. There was a space to have chai. There was a space to feed the cats, feed the dogs. So we spend a lot of amount of time, because when the pots are drying, you're waiting for to pull the handles on the pot. There was a lot of non-space that we were actually occupying more than just our wheels. Wheel was our first entity, and everything like this, the non-space was a second entity that we had. So I think the whole way we did the planning for the project also was through that. So because we were building so far away from Pune is where she comes from, and we were building like an hour. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what's happening. It's kind of not going back. Yeah, sorry. We're good. We're good. I'm not going to zoom in, but so because we were building so far away, normally these, like I was speaking to you earlier, that normally all these potter studios are always start at a backyard, but here we were building from scratch. So it couldn't just be a small space where you sit with your wheel and have a kin. It had to anticipate what the studio could do. Only if you had the space, you could invite people, do other things. I mean, in this case, I was also helping my friend devise the brief, because we were co-thinking about it, that do you anticipate workshops, do you anticipate other things happening, do you anticipate people coming and firing with you or not. So we were co-devising the brief also at this point, because she and I were studying at the same time, we were still starting out. So these questions about 10 years from now were still questions. So we were looking at, because at a remote site like that, you don't want to do an additive construction, you want to do it at once, because anyways it's a lot of effort. So you want to think and facilitate for at once. So this was her space that she could use. This was where she would host other people. I mean, all of this dark space that you see is built, and this is a glazed store space. And everything had an adjacent open space to it, where you go dry your stuff, where you go put your stuff when something's happening. And this whole corridor sort of combines and contains the whole thing. And firing as a potter is like a communal activity. I mean, electric kilns and small kilns at home and small studios are very different, but when you're doing large firings, it's a community activity. So because firing goes on for like 24 hours, sometimes 72 hours, sometimes. So it's like you do your break, somebody else comes in, feeds for you, and you can't do it alone. So you have to have people. So when you have the kiln, how do you imagine people to be around that kiln? How do people spend time? So all of those were things that we were discussing and thinking while we were doing this. And the vault came here, the vault structure came here because I didn't know so much about Pune's soil and how the clay and all functions. So I was like, we'll get these guna tubes made nearby with a local potter, so that their engagement of community is already there. But Pune's soil is it's really bad for ceramics. It's not clay at all. So everything in Pune, as terracotta and all that, comes from somewhere else. So it was not at this point economical at all to do it. But the whole structure was devised for this idea. So then we ended up doing a brick vault. It's not moving. Okay, yeah. So I mean, these are just again pictures from then. It's just now that she started using the space and we've not really documented it, but yeah, and again, this is a small story to do with this, because I already had a kiln back home, so we were making these water spouts and all that for her, just to try it out, and then she would take it ahead and make the spouts herself, so that some of her elements could also come in, but each of these tubes would cost us about 2,000 rupees each, and was not affordable at all. So these were these sewage pipes that are made in ceramics. So this was a smaller dia pipe on the top and larger dia pipe on the bottom that sort of made the rainwater harvesting system. So these were the gutter where things got channelized here, and there were chambers underneath that sort of, and this was elevated for a reason. We didn't want the PVC large pipes throughout because aesthetic purpose, but again we didn't definitely want the loss of water because of wind. So how much ever we could reduce the amount of, there are chains now, we don't have pictures with it, but there are chains now here. But how much ever we could reduce the distance between the two, and we could direct the water, is why the spout is so long and the receiver is so large. So yeah, that's her parents' wedding biryani pot that's lying here that we use in the garden. Yeah, so this picture, particularly left picture, is from Golden Bridge Pottery. This is like a cemented surface. All the plastered surface is where we used to dry our clays because cement absorbs the water. So that's some small, because everything else was lime plaster and that was not going to help. So we left some parts of it open in cement plaster for her to sort of still do the same processes and not devise another process for it. Yeah, this was the house that we built for her. I mean, don't have too many pictures for it, but again, it revolved around the idea that came from her own house. And like, again, space for nothingness. They have a lot of dogs, so open spaces and all of that was, I mean, I'm probably not get too much in detail to it. But again, if you see this model here, this model also was built because there was a lot of play of these plinths, and this model was kept on site because, again, we were working with an organized contractor again the first time here, but it was still not so organized. So they were not reading drawings. So we had some, just for the plinth, because there was a lot of variation, it was just still without dimensions. Again, dimensions were given a separate image to them, but it was still kept there for them. Okay, these are just some pictures from the inside. Again, we built things with earth walls here, and did the same logistics of sambar and tomatoes. Yeah, so after we'd worked here for 4 years, we realized that there was a lot of issues when we are basically the rammed earth wall a skilled person is doing, the vault a skilled person is doing, the local contractor is doing all the other job here, but he's not sensitive to what you've built already. So when he's going to pour the concrete, he's still going to spoil the walls. So that sensitivity he doesn't have to build the walls, but the sensitivity around it also is not there. And when these things came together, I think there was a lot of complexity, and that's why, and the person on site couldn't envision the finishing that this kind of a setup would require. So then we realized when we are working in a remote site like that, when we don't have a very organized person, we'd have to simplify our methods of making in terms of design, not in terms of design, but in terms of materiality and how things came together. So this thing I'm going to very briefly show. We are doing 2 weekend homes here in Karjat, and the first time we got that project, we're like, again Maharashtra, again all the mafia that coming into place, and we'll have to devise a different way of working. Again, the territory and the unknowns, remoteness and accessibility, topography and ever-changing workforce was a constant in this project also. But we had learned from the past little bit. The project's still going on since the last 4 years, so not so much. But again, 12 hours to Bombay and 3 hours to the site. Here in this case, we were only going once in 2 months because we had devised in a way that we were not only one agency was doing everything. So that engagement was not required so much. We were just coming timely to supervise things. And because we were coming in the morning and going in the night, we only had a 2-3 hour engagement on site. That also sort of changed how we were looking at the site each time. So these are just two things that we are doing in Karjat right now. This is a project that we've been doing in the last 3 years. This is near to the village in Karjat, and this is even more remote. So when we got this first project and went on for 3 years, we are like, we are never doing anything again in Karjat. But when something came back, we didn't know how to say no, and we didn't want to say no probably. And we were like, we're already doing something here. It's just going to be a small commute to another place, but that's an hour away from each other also. And this particular site is like 10-12 kilometers remote from a normal road also. So we don't have any facility or anything around to sort of start building. So we had to depend on the most local contractor to do everything because of all the land mafia that exists there. So by this time, just the reason of showing this project was only I'm not going to go through the plans and things, just the reason of the way of, when we learned from Kamshed, we already sort of simplified materiality for sure. And we sort of played in architecture and design and more with that than the materials itself. So that's what came together. And the other Karjat project we are doing, we further simplified it after the learning from the first one. Yeah, this is what the Karjat project looks like. So we have the stone masonry that we are doing locally with them, and everything is found locally and happening. Yeah. So. This is another project, The Nest. It's an institutional project. It was our first institutional project that we were doing. And here, this was the first time we were working with a corporate client. And till now, because everything was very intuitive, our design process is also very intuitive. We went to site, some things would change. Like at a window stage, we'll start devising a window and things. In this, working with this corporate, they wanted everything with a 7 printout set on the first day before we started construction, with all possible costs, with interiors done. And we'd never done this before. And we never even handled the scale before. So this was when, like a negotiation, like the corporate way for sure. And the site here particularly was like, this is the site, and all the red things that you see here are the trees. So we had about 100 trees on site here, and we had to build in this tight thing. And again, these people had seen our work in earth, and they were like, we want to build in earth. And here we had fought against also for quite some time to not build in earth, because the whole space was very dark itself with the canopy of the tree. So you needed light, and it was for an age group of 6 months to 6 years. So it's not like not to say that you're not understanding materiality, but there I think light and those kind of things were more important here, more than just the materiality. But again, we had to do it in earth because they really wanted to do it. And so basically coming to that was like, this was a site, so we basically just scooped out everything that was left over from the trees here. Because because it had to be a linear space, and the accessibility had to be from the center, that space would be very dark. So we had a spine that sort of brought light in. So the spine only went to a particular height, and the light came in through all parts. And then in the playrooms we had so many trees, but at a level of a window you can never actually look at these trees. You can only look at a trunk and never experience these trees. So then we had these tree lights, like not skylights, but tree lights that we opened up to sort of open to these spaces. Yeah, that's how like things opened up. There at a court in the center here. So everything had a level that opened up to trees on the other side. More than an architectural learning, I think for us, it was the first time we were working in a very organized way. And this whole question has always stayed with me. I've never worked for anybody. I've interned with somebody before. I had not worked with an office, so there were no systems in place. And to handle something like this and to go to a corporate client and deliver, I think it was the first time. And back then, somebody in the office had just worked at HCP and come from 6 months. And they had a system. So he brought system. So we like formulated our folders for the first time. We formulated names, everything for the first time. We moved to another software. So we put systems in place. And I think what great it has been for the practice is like people brought things to the practice. I think we didn't all have everything we needed, and every time somebody's always brought something that we've carried ahead, and that sort of has really been a boon to everything that we've done. So these are the lights that would open up and filter in. Yeah, these were the openings, and this is that light would open into the spine here. Yeah, so these are the kind of openings in the long corridor here. Light would pass through that. This was taken in on a rainy day, but there's ample light that's coming in through those caveats. Yeah, this is again work in progress pictures that are there. Yeah, so this was like another project. Meanwhile, when I was working on those two first projects, I had my client's right hand who had some property in the village nearby, and he kept talking about the structures bending, the structures happening, this and all that. So I'm like, let's go one day and figure out what's really there. And we sort of went to his place, and he's like, and I in that time I was like, yeah, we are going to conserve it. We are going to find somebody and help us conserve it. And we got the structural engineer on board and figured out that there was nothing in that building that we could actually conserve. And there was a very romantic idea that we don't want to break it open, but we had to, because these constructions that you see around are very new, but all the other structures were all timber structures made for farmers, and the first floor was made in earth and bamboo. The foundations didn't go that deep, so there's not much that we could really save from the place. So again, negotiations of aspiration and ties. The particular family that we were building it with, half of them live in the US, and they come here when they come to India. This is the house that they come to. And their aspiration was like, we make money in the US, so we want to show that we make a large house, that we have money. But that sort of didn't go, when we were designing, we couldn't do that. They wanted like, even if you make a small house, the facade should be big. But we didn't do it. But that was the first aspiration that came from. And budget was the constraint for sure. And And when I've written the architect's desire, I'll come to that, why I've written that, and the unorganized workforce. This is how the whole build was around. And this, if you see, this was the house. And when we opened up this house, this is the neighbor's house. So it's a practice in the village that when you open up your house and building again, your neighbor goes on a place to rent, and that's okay. Like, it's acceptable that he goes out for a couple of months, he'll go stay some place on rent, and he'll come back when your house is done. But meanwhile, he also constructed his house. So that was the whole thing here. So this was the older plan and this was the new plan. So here when I said architect's desire, I'm like, we are going to build a new house, so then the plan needs to look different at least. The experience needs to be different at least. But just the way the linearity of the whole structure was, there was nothing that we could really move. The services had to go back in the court. The house had to face the social denomination of men first, in the first living room, women in the second room, was still there. So the social structure was still there. What we really helped them do was the volumetric change, because back then this space was only for the dump of all the farming goods that would come. And there was no light coming in because it was a very makeshift space also. So volumetric change is what we did, and all the timber that came out from the house that we could revive, we made everything, like all the beams and everything out of columns and everything out of that timber. I mean, yeah, we enjoy making doors and windows a lot. So that's one of the, yeah. So that's how the house is. Yeah. So all the door windows and everything got made from the same timber we had here. Yeah, slowing down a little bit, coming back to where we are placed in Ahmedabad, our office. Yeah, here negotiation, like I've cut the non-evolving systems. There were no systems, but we are evolving, so there are evolving systems. Filling in gaps, because a lot of people, a lot of clientele who comes to us are people who say that we want to work with a young practice, and that want to work with a young practice is also one of the reasons, because they know that you are going to be involved with your full heart, and a bigger office even is not going to be able to give that much time. And we've heard it from all our clients that we want to work with a young firm, we want a young landscape person on board, and because that young practice is there, I think at this throughout this time we still have filled a lot of gaps that were not meant to be ours. But we've learned a lot through that process, so I think I'm very grateful to that. And we do work with a lot of collaborative models, because it was a single-led practice, and every time, I mean, you feel like in an isolation, in a silo when you're designing, there's no sounding board. I had not worked for somebody, so I didn't really have mentors to go around to. And so that's the reason I do a lot of collaborations where things churn, people come on board, people go on project basis, and the back and forth. And we are very okay with the back end. Our things go on the design board, go on for a long time. We arrive to something after a whole long thing, but we are okay. Like, we like the back and forth. This is just where the office is primarily, I could start practice very easily also, because my parents already had the space, and I just had to put my laptop and sit. So that was, I mean, this is my bedroom here, my office is right here, it's like a door out away. It's a penthouse, my parents live downstairs, and this is the office upstairs. This is my parents' office. My parents are architects too. They do very different kind of work, but this whole space was supposed to be their office, but when we moved to this space, they'd slowed down work a bit, so they are now confined to this much, and we've taken over the whole space here. And this is my kin here, my potter's kin, and my potter's wheel here, and that's where we access the office from. Yeah, just a few pictures from the office. When we'd finished 5 years, I mean, like I mentioned a couple of times before now, that I'd never worked for anybody, so I've always had that back thought in my head that, if you're doing okay, if things are okay, you're moving in the right direction, there are no systems, you've never been taught to work with somebody, taught to delegate work, probably the kind of work you're doing, if you're going the right way, because we were spending a lot of time on the drawing board, a lot of time in the back and forth, filling gaps. So because there was no already informed way of working, we did this retrospect after 5 years. We put an exhibition together, like every project was put, not just by its project, but by a panel next to it, something like this. There were negotiations with it, there were layers of who did what was our role in the project. Even if we were filling somebody else's gap, it was written there. So everybody who would come to the exhibition had to read the projects through those things and not just the projects by itself. I mean, this retrospect was more for getting our mentors, friends together to sort of do a critical conversation to show us a way ahead. But I think it was more like a conversation of like celebrating things more than that at the end. Yeah. So this was some images from there. Yeah. So back till the first 5 years, when we were doing this very unorganized way of doing things and building systems, and my father, when I had begun work, I would get very worried in the beginning because I was feel like I would like the first project I would literally, like when I'm saying crying, I would literally come home crying that I'm filling gaps, that I'm getting food for people, I'm doing this, I'm taking these people, dropping them home in the night, and all that is not my job. Like, why am I doing all this? I'm right out of architecture school. You've been taught that you can do 100 things, change the world and all that, and you're really basically getting food for this guy here, dropping him at 8 o'clock back to his house, managing a pillow for him, whatever, XYZ. So I would really be like, my dad was like, you know, for the first 10 years, also don't, I mean, it was also about like, I'm not making any money. So I'd try and take a non-AC bus to Baroda that I'm saying, because I was not getting paid in that project. So I was like, I would take a non-AC bus to go to Baroda, like, oh, I'm not making money, so I'm going to actually like optimize at the most I can. So my father at that time said that, you know, like for the first 10 years, don't think about what's coming in and what's going out. Otherwise, you'll not be able to do what you're doing. So just keep doing things. And I think when we finished that 5 years, and I thought that, I mean, my parents did what they did, and they sort of ran the practice like they did. But I did think that there was a need of, and I was always surrounded by architects who've always talked about things romantically, things about passion, things about everything. But at the end of the day, if this has to go on for a long time, I wanted to see if there's a possibility of looking at it differently also. So back then, like when we finished 5 years, that was the time when I actually started writing my accounts too. Like somebody was writing the account, but I was looking into them, what's coming in, what's going on. That's when we started. And that brought me to this course in IIM Bangalore. There was a Goldman Sachs Women Entrepreneurship Program. There were 70 other women with me who were running businesses. None of them, I mean, not architects, not designers at all. So the questions and money and numbers were very different. They made fun of, we had to put out charts to show how much one is making and all that. And they all laughed because this is not even called, they wouldn't even call it a business or anything. And the first negotiation here that I've written here is economics of it all for sure, but practice as a business. That was the first time like somebody's asking me to say practice as a business. I mean, we still like, I don't know what I've taken back from there as yet. We are still sort of brewing on it, but that was a discomfort already there. But it was quite an interesting thing because we had mentors who were working with us. So they were talking about putting systems in order, standardizing things, delegating and all that. But when you're doing a practice that is so intuitive, you can't standardize, people are coming to you because they don't want to standardize. So those questions and those answers didn't really fit the same way that they said. So we had mentors individually. Then we spoke about just putting systems in board. That what are the 100 things list of questions that you put together when you start a project, and you make a list for the office to keep. That even if 10 people are coming in new and all that, they at least have the same questions. Their answers and what they arrive at will be very different, but at least those questions are there. I mean, I still haven't made up a proper list to it, but we are small little building systems around it for sure. And that's been my learning from the course. I mean, this was like whatever numbers and like texts and everything, then charts and everything that we were doing there. I mean, nothing's readable, but it was just to put like what kind of work we were doing there at the program. And it also talked about, because at Women Entrepreneur, we are also looking at an emotional intelligence. And I think it was a very interesting aspect of practice also, as, I mean, not to genderize it, but in a very positive way. It was shown how emotional intelligence helps practices. So here, even it was, these projects were post, all of that was happening. This was a project for my pottery teacher in Pondi. So this was a project in Auroville. Again, we were like flying down to Chennai, taxi or a bus ride to Pondi, and then getting a Luna to go to site. But back then, I mean, this is a very small project to do so much commute for. We were already doing another large project there. That's why we could actually suffice to do this project here. Again, the negotiation with this is a very tight 30-50 typical plot there, and there were like 5 trees there. And like we were very sure that we didn't want to get rid of those trees because I was the only character in that particular plot there. And again, because I'd spent a lot of time in Auroville, the way of life is not very typically of a city. There's much more in between spaces, there's much more spilling out, much more open things, and it's not a normal notion of a living room, a dining room, things moving out, a bedroom. So things were like, I had already experienced that life a little bit, and I knew my teacher very well. So that sort of came in really handy. Again, land of a different language. I had picked up a little Tamil in my whole 3-4 years there, internship and all that, but not as much as I could communicate on the phone at least. The long distance, the catenary I'll come to, and the nuances on the paper. So again, Auroville, a lot of, if you all have been to Auroville or whoever, like there's a lot of character in how materials are put together. Even the landscape, it feels natural. And how do you do all of those things sitting on a paper there? And it's not very possible because, oh, I want to just put a large rock, put it here. But if I'm so far away, I'm visiting site once in 3-4 months, that's not going to be possible. So we did the whole construction and everything, finishing put together. And one of my seniors was just staying here 500 meters away from the site. So we brought her on board for the final edges that we thought that staying back in Ahmedabad, we couldn't do justice to. So they were our eyes on site back then, and we were coordinating with them to do what decisions. So because there was this number 1 that you see was a large teak tree there, and that was the center of the premise. And if you see this plot is a 30 by 40 plot, it was a very light, tight plot to build anything, especially with the trees, it was even more tighter. And my teacher was going to stay here alone. I know how she lived and everything. So how typically you would look at a front yard and backyard, I know that sort of system would not work here. So we were not even trying to do that. We just fragmented the whole plan in a way that everything opened into something. Everything had its own space, so it didn't have a large accumulated open space, but in fragments there were these spaces. And the SAG here, the project is also called SAG, it became the center of the whole project here. And these are all the iterations done to just for us to see the tree from the living room and the spaces from itself. Because if you're just opening out at the ground level, you're always again going to just see the trunk, and we wanted to see the foliage of the space. This was the tree here, and this was just when we had done the foundation, the groundbreaking. So this is the catenary that we opened. I mean, this picture doesn't really show the tree here, but this sort of whole space, through this space opens up to this tree that is here, and that was the half catenary that we had done here, opening up to these trees. And everything sort of opened. If you see this kitchen here, opens into a small backyard here. The bedroom opens here into a court. This opens into another court here. This opens here. This was a pottery studio for herself, so that could be accessible from the outside, and everything was tied with a corridor here. And Auroville, typically people would not just they would rent out parts of their house to people. So the first floor was accessible from the outside to rent out and be an independent entity. So these are some of the pictures from that. So these stones I'm talking about, I mean, I could make a very structured rectangular drawing for it, but I don't know what stone would have come. So these were things that helped when we had Teja, who was working from Auroville, on board to sort of do the smaller nuances on site for sure. These are the pictures from that. So this cutout here was just to sort of, this part that you see that's skewed is just to accommodate the tree here. Yeah, that's the tree here. And here again, because it was Auroville, there was no problem of skilled work. So that was not a question, but the nuances were very different of a tight plot and things. This was a small theatre school that we did in Ahmedabad. It was like 15 minutes away from our office. Again, because it was a theatre school, and it was, this is my friend from college, he now does theatre, and wanted to construct a theatre school above his parents' house. So it was already in a very old structure, and we had to build a space above it. And again, it had to be of some kind of identity, because the school needed that identity also in terms of as a focal point for them. And yeah, privacy and control, because they were in a residential neighborhood, so they needed a layer of privacy also. And how sort of some parts of it, because they already had a ground structure, the ground place, they were already doing theatre too. So how smaller instances would sort of become a stage for them to perform. So how the whole space would act together as like if you see this diagram here, so this was a place where they were already doing theatre in the open air. So we added the staircase to go up, a small platform for here to interact with this, a small platform again to interact, and then this space was made. So just at smaller instances also how you could reconnect, and the whole place could facilitate the theatre to happen. So yeah, it's a very simple structure made. And a lot of our clients are my age and likewise like of a young age where they are doing their first things by them, like, so the money is very crucial in all the projects. So we are very mindful of something, the finance not crossing the aesthetics always, and still trying to find a fine balance between all them, because most of the projects we've been doing right now are all makers in and around who have grown up with or have known. So money is, like, I know that if I had to spend the money and make my studio, how important it would have been for me. So I think that approach has always been very primary for us. This is Moving is a series of exhibitions and installations we do. As architecture practice, I think things can go very slow and things can take 3-4 years altogether, and I think these installations and arts are things that sort of shake the studio up for a couple of months and we go back to our desks and doing the slow processes again. We basically were brought on board by IIA to design their exhibition, and in the last 4-5 years we've also done the curation part, and we've moved like varied venues. This was in a real estate building that was on the riverfront, which this particular session was on public spaces. That's why we've done it on the riverfront here. This was about young practices. The session was about young practices, and we'd done it at the CEPT campus. This was the first edition, so we already had a land. And the module here also has sort of, I don't know if the module's gone missing, sorry. But so these bamboo structure that we had built here, these are all modular and has stayed with us from the first season. So it's been 5 years, so we're using the same module. And the first module was devised around these columns because we couldn't pierce through anything. Take structural support, so they were these rings that were steel rings that were clamped on these columns, and that sort of stayed. And we sort of moved because the light cables and everything was stretched through those things, and that sort of moved everywhere in an outdoor space. Some things got added. We needed a model space the next year, so we added those things. Things got added and subtracted through the years. And just last year we done I'm going to come to another project later, but we were building a textile design studio for a friend, Mori, if you know. They run a beautiful textile practice. So they were doing an installation here in Godrej. They had gotten the fellowship, so they basically wanted to build a tent with their fabric. So we were devising the structure for them. And this was a pavilion we had done for our collaborative in Ahmedabad. And again, these are all like things. This was like steel and bamboo, and this was primarily steel, something that everything's like dismantleable, could open up and not bolt by itself. And these were things that we were not, like, it's not like as a practice we were interested in doing, but this one thing came, and I think we put in a lot of time and effort studying, researching everything, and so that domain sort of kept becoming more of an interest to us over the years. So these were the pictures from that raw collaborative pavilion. This all black is the charred bamboo, and this red is a steel. Yeah, this is the Godrej Conscious Collective Pavilion, and this is all their textiles that came on it. And this is all steel, like this is like a 25 dia steel member, and everything can be opened and dismantled. Yeah, this is the textile design studio I was talking about. I mean, these are again process images. This was again in Gandhinagar. Negotiation here was anticipation and provision. They're again a very young textile design. I mean, they're very established, but they're a very young practice design studio. And they keep doing exhibitions, and they've taken textiles to a very different level at all scales and possible ways. And the whole thing about, we want to keep provision, like the provision is a constant word for them. They want to hang things out of everywhere and anywhere possible. So the building had a lot of provision. So that was that. And the partner, Brinda is the textile designer, and the partner Kabir comes from a graphic design background, and basically he's doing the brand building. And all his brief was always about documenting. So they're basically a firm where they do a lot of conversation through story making, through narratives. So they wanted to not just have a place to work, but also how their work could be documented well, how their everyday can be documented. So all his brief always came from documentation. So we had additions in the structure just made where he could stand and take pictures. So that was the first time somebody was only talking about documentation and taking pictures from where and how do we document our work. And budget again, because again, a young person starting building their large space, tectonics of material. Again, when we began with this project, it was an agricultural land, so we really couldn't build in a full construction way. Meanwhile, in the process, they got an NA for the land, and later, but we were already devised in steel and we wanted to do a light structure. Manjunath here was helping us with the structure here, and negotiation of the infill and the structure, because it was steel and we had to minimize the footprint, so the infill had to be within the structure and not inside or outside. And over customization. I mean, I'm not saying it in a negative way, but in a very positive way, that there was a huge amount of customization done in the project. Again, we could have done this here only because of this, that it's 1.5 hours from where we are, and we could visit the site thrice a week. If this had to be done anywhere where we are remotely located, we couldn't have done what we are doing here. So this is the whole structure. This as you went, like this is the land, this is a farmed land. This is the structure here when this only the roof structure was up. You enter this space. This is a textile design studio, and this is a gallery space. They had a large. They are also looking at their work across time, across how they are going to build. They are anticipating that they are going to go into production of set and things. So they wanted large spaces to host those events also. So there's a lot of anticipation in terms of what will come to this building, and a lot of thinking towards that. And what if you leave ends open, what happens here later. So there's a lot of possibility of how things could grow later for them also. And this was like their office and like a service area and the dining space here. Sorry, these are construction drawings put here, but yeah. And this is like the whole, Lohita has worked on some of them. So this was how the whole truss system came together. That was the volume. This whole space here, the alley here, they had no other use but to go up and document the whole space, to take pictures from, to document the story of the brand. And that's what the whole alley and space came here from. So because their work is very dynamic in their color and everything, so to begin, we were looking at the materiality of the project, and we were looking like the base has to be very neutral, and we were sure that we were doing a steel and an infill system and not a brick wall. So sandstone, I mean, we were looking at stones, and no other stone was as light and as monotone. So we'd gone to these quarries in Jodhpur to look at stone, and they had come with us to take their fabrics and swatches to see the swatches against these different kind of stones. So that's the building when the structure was coming up. And like because it was so close to us, and it was a fairly complex project in its making and tectonics, we would really have 3-4 hours of site discussions, and there was a lot of back and forth with the contractor also. We devised something, we had Manjunath on board, he would say something, the site would tell us that as a fabricator I will not be able to do this. So how do you sort of go back to keep devising? I think we had a lot of we are still doing that. It's been 2.5-3 years to the project, but everything is still small details because everything is so over customized in this case, and not something that we've seen really we could refer to. So yeah, there's a lot of figuring with the contractor itself on site. So that's how the columns in the court are. And this small rod here is not to actually no structural purpose, but because the two fabrics, top and bottom, have to be like a scroll format, be there. So there were small little things we added because how they could use the space. If you see the small gap in the stone here, it was also for them to sort of at every level hang things as layers. So those smaller things, you see a gap here. So those are smaller provisions that were in process also kept, like this stone was actually going to touch the slab here. But when we were just going to put, we were like, what if we just elevated and this small provision, otherwise they could not hang anything on this alley, and all of the walls were going to be stone, so you could not nail technically. So how do you sort of give smaller provisions for things to happen? There's just some pictures from the construction again. Yeah. The water collects here, there's a small channel that goes around this court. Again, this is a very fun thing. This whole court is marble, but they're all cut into 1 by 1 feet because that's how they measure their fabric. So they would actually come lay their fabric on the ground and sort of cut, measure, and that's a brief that came from them, but it was very interesting for us to sort of follow through and do it. So that was like their measure ground to things. I mean, this is a render again just to show of how their work is and how things are anticipated. Yeah, that's the gallery space. And that's the textile space. Yeah, so that's where all the work was. And again, I think that little thing that I keep repeating, that I've never worked for anybody, keeps sort of going somewhere. I mean, it's been 8 years that I've been working by myself, and we have a wonderful team that we are working with, and everybody sort of brings lots of great experiences on board, and that's how we've evolved. But every now and then there's a little need to sort of go out, see something else, come back. And these interests have also to begin with, there was not so much interest in landscape to begin with as a question, but because when we were looking at lands in Karjat, Kamshed, everywhere, where we were looking at so much landscape and how we were dealing with water, how we were dealing with everything else, that interest keeps sort of evolving with how every project has come in more than a linear thought of what I as an architect would have wanted to do, because there was never a thought, right? So I think that has been wonderful, that there was an unknown and we keep finding things on the way. So I mean, yeah, just like a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Glen Murcutt Masterclass, where there were a bunch of 32 other people practicing in different parts of the country, and and again, I went to the course because the course was about building with land, and how the building sits lightly on the ground. How do you read land around you? And that's the interest that has arisen through those questions that have come through all the projects, and that's what led me here. And the negotiations are questions and more questions for sure. The fear of stagnation, what led to everything that kept happening. The ever-changing interest, in some part we're like, we were very interested in doing structures, we are very interested in doing landscape. So that sort of has very evolved every time that we've gotten something. We've gone to a full mode of research, full mode of doing everything that we could do for the project. And varied ways of working, where I'm saying, because everybody came from a very different background. Some people were there who were running offices of 400 people. Some people, they came from a very different background, and these mentors also. I think there was more non-architecture, how we would call it, but very much architecture, because everything was very intertwined. These were some of the things from there. Yeah. One thing leads to another and always does. Sorry, the always has the Y and A not correct, but yes. Yeah.
Am I audible? So thank you, Naomi, for so generously taking us through your studio's processes and projects. It was really beautiful to see the kind of attention that you paid to like each kind of space, but also different kinds of processes that you set up as you move from project to project, or from one geography to the next. We'll start with a set of questions, and I will start with a few of mine, because I've had some time to go through your work, but also very beautifully, and I keep on telling you this, read what you've written about, the way each project kind of opens up new questions rather than just resolving or answering something. And you do it beautifully on your website as well, and you did it over here in your presentation as well. So, I mean, my first question would essentially be that, this proposition that there's this accumulation that's happening as, architecture keeps on unfolding into your practice as well. And you speak about material and labor not just as a means of construction, but also as a form of knowledge. And so then, how do you kind of start treating your practice itself as that form of learning, that starts unfolding? And sort of what do you have to give up to let a practice be shaped by what it encounters? What do you kind of have to give up for, to let the practice be shaped by, what it encounters with each and every kind of project and geography, rather than, what you set it out to be? So that was like my first question. And I mean, the second question is that, around anticipation itself. And it's almost understood as a distributed, negotiated capacity. And not something that you as an architect hold by yourself, but it's something that's shared with the site, with the community, and the material conditions that are there. So then what does it mean to then design with anticipation that really isn't yours to, control? So those are the two questions I would, try, use to open up this conversation, and then we can probably see and the other questions that are.
Yeah, so the first, I think, the answer to it, I mean, I don't think it's the best answer to it, in a way that it's probably not something that will work for everybody. For me, what worked is I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think just by things happening and things coming to you, that sort of let everything else happen. Even the first project when we were doing, he was very sure that he wanted a dormer roof. And with what it said, what it happens and everything, I think it was nice that these random ideas and thoughts were thrown at you and you had to figure out. I think that sort of really helped evolve that thing for a person like me, where I didn't know where didn't have an architectural proposition where we said that, okay, I want to do a social spectrum, where I want to do something very specific. So that really helped. When we had the first set of artisans come on board, I think as architecture students, when we come out of college, at that time, at least, I was like, when these skilled people are coming, and I'm going to make use of, and I've seen that in Oroville also, like a skill transfer, like people are training other people and everything. And I was like, I'm going to have, it is my responsibility of some kind to train the set of people around me. And then through the second project, I realized that we trained a set, but I am not a contractor, and it's not my role at some point in time. And I am not able to facilitate a next project to them that will keep them there. So it's not like there's a skill acquired, but I'm not going to be able to give them a place where that skill is going to be used for them to continue that skill. So all of that, probably somebody else can take it up for sure, and it's a great thing to do. But something that I realized much earlier, that that's something that I couldn't sort of take forward. My interests were very different, that I wanted to facilitate that, but at the same time wanted to also think about design, also think about everything else that was forming architecture. I mean, that's to do with the skill and community that we were talking about. And the other part where I think it's the same answer, that because there was no structure, there was no linear way of going about things. And very, very thankfully, people have been very open. Till now, I've had my thesis external viva, Mitul Desai, Studio II from Surat, who had come to my thesis viva. We'd kept in touch. So I've him, Bijoy, Madhusudan. There are people I've not known in a very formal and an academic setup or a work setup before. But when we were doing all these first projects and all that, and just before we start construction or do a working drawing set, we sort of reach out to these people and I'm doing this, what do you think? There's that, and then the layer of working drawing starts. So, and we've really done that for all the things that we have done so far. And that sort of, I am really thankful for all that mentorship that has come across. And a lot of times, those questions are not, those answers that they've given always are not something that most times you've not taken those forward. But they've posed other questions to sort of think about, and things have developed out of it. So, yeah. Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Also, it's just an observation, but in your first project, you talk about almost living on site, and to it becoming this kind of a remote kind of, you're handling it in a very remote way. So there's a change in the nature of practice itself that has happened from really staying over there, to something where you're just sort of dropping into and setting things up for. So I mean, what do you kind of then project for what is the next thing that starts happening from here? How does the nature of practice probably start changing itself, or is there a sort of a sense of how things could sort of evolve from here?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that because I really don't know. But with everything that's come and with a different nature, we've given different set of drawings, different kind of drawings. Like sometimes becomes only a three-dimensional thing that people understand. So far because people have come to us for what we have put out. So people still want the same thing. So even if the context changed, they don't want a separate thing altogether. So we are still trying to find a fine balance between everything, but definitely we've also learned through all the mistakes that we've made. We have a accumulated bank of things to do, things not to do again. And that sort of, I think those learnings will sort of define what we do next. But I really don't have an answer of how it sort of becomes in the next 5, 10, whatever years.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll sort of open it up right now for the audience, and I have like 1 or 2 more questions, but we can come to them eventually, like give people a chance to kind of ask questions. Shreya?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for presenting your work. It was wonderful to see Doro's work. I've also been to a few of those sites when I was in Ahmedabad during the open, this thing on Ahmedabad Commons. So I wanted to ask, what is your process of approaching different projects? Let's say because the project brief, some of what remains kind of similar when you're doing these second home projects. So how does your process eventually change? I mean, how do you approach each and every project differently? And because that shows in your work there is some kind of evolution, I would say. But so what is your process of approaching each and every project is what I would say, ask.
It is definitely very context driven, and by context here I will not just say the landscape and the very, very normal way of saying context as what is next to you, but again how I've spoken about how do you get to the site, what is the time that you can spend on the site, and what is the skill available around you, and what is the aspiration. And I think that is enough data for us always to start with enough questions for us to answer. So that sort of really has been the key things for each of these projects. And I mean, as a design process, it's pretty intuitive. So it's not a very formal way of every project going about the same steps also.
Yeah, hi. So I had a quick question. You spoke extensively about how like going to Auroville right after you finished your degree and you did the internship with Dust Studio and Golden Bridge Pottery and stuff, and just being around in Auroville for your first initial sort of years has shaped your practice quite a lot, and like you can see that in the work that Doro does. So I wanted to ask how much do you think being in that context gave to you, and how different could it have been if it wasn't for those initial years in Auroville?
Yeah. I would not completely agree completely say that it's a lot of things from Auroville, because that internship time was very brief, and when I was later spending time in Auroville was more as a potter, and I was far away from architecture completely. And I think definitely the sensitivity towards things, because you're always you're always living on the ground. Your relation's always to the next immediate outside, which in sitting in Ahmedabad, I don't do that. I live in an apartment, I don't do that. So that context is definitely there, how you're living, how each of those things are happening. But again, not very constructionally. Definitely I had friends around. When I had to build my first wall, I had friends from Auroville who were setting up practices elsewhere. I could take help and call them. It definitely helped me build a community that I could always call and ask questions, for sure. But I wouldn't directly put it to the place, but more also like the interest towards making was always there. And I think it was there even while probably that made me go there also maybe, but I think that interest of making and tectonics was something that that's been a constant thing that is driving the practice more than just the place. I mean, definitely not to take away from the place at all. Golden Bridge Pottery has given a lot of understanding of materiality, not in terms of earth and clay, that things take its own process, take its own time to dry, cracks develop, just basic things of letting things be was definitely something that has been acquired.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Naomi. You mentioned in multiple projects a term called space for nothingness. Could you elaborate on that concept for me? And so the question is, like, what's your imagination of that space of nothingness, and how does the inception of that space come like?
Yeah, that technically is the space you do everything else in, but that you spend the most time in at some point. But I mean, through architecture school at CEPT, through other institutions that you see, there's so much more gathering space. There's so much more space to just be, like things that are formed out of spaces that are functions. So that's the space of nothingness that I was speaking about, to just feed the cats, to just go have a cup of tea, to just gather when the firing is going on for a couple of hours and you have to be away from the fire. So those were the spaces of nothingness, and that is anticipated when I showed the plan. I think there were a lot of human beings there. Like it was a little thought out in terms of that it is going to be actually the most occupied space when you're not working. So that's why it doesn't have a function and a name to it. So that's the space of nothingness, and that enhances your experience for everything else that happens. So.
Hi, I really enjoyed the presentation. My question is regarding, like, it's interesting to see the practice as a recipe of, from formalizing the internal system to organizing the workforce that you have on your site. I just wanted to ask, does it really come from your practice of doing pottery, in a sense that since formation of a particular model takes its own time, I wanted to ask you that does formation of your own practice took its own time, but what did the formalization of particular systems, as you mentioned that you went to a course in IIM Bangalore, like what did those formal systems affect the overall working of your practice?
Adapted everything that I've learned there, because the systems were very driven for a business, and we are still struggling between the practice and a business as a conversation, right? But it was a good start to just go and say that architects can make money, and we can talk about money, and we can build system, do the same work we are doing with a different system, to think about that. And it's not a taboo to think that a practice eventually in life can run as a more than making money, run as a sustainable thing, because you want to keep doing it, and you can only keep doing it if things keep running, right? So, again, I don't think I would relate it to pottery again, to that aspect of things, but you couldn't have a system on day one because you didn't have the rest of the food for it, right? I didn't need a structure because I didn't have anybody. So as soon as everything one started adding to it, you started requiring those things, and that's when you sort of stepped out and looked for it. So there was nothing as an adaptation of things that you could take day one, because day one you were one person doing things, and you were on site, so you didn't even need a technical drawing system to deliver anything. And when things came to a very organized system, you needed to deliver a drawing beforehand, and you needed that system. So you developed that system on the way. When number of people increased, in the office. I mean, till now we were like almost about 6, 7 people, and like we were still working one-on-one with each person in the office. Now we do have a little more organization, one person's work as a team and another person, and that's slowly changing as in the requirement of what we are doing is changing through time. So it's just, we are answering to the questions that keep arising and the troubles that keep arising each time. And I had seen my parents, so like I was away from all money and everything because my parents also spoke the same language as we learn in architecture schools, right? So there was never a conversation on money. And I thought it was important to just see whether what that world looks like, to sort of see if we could look at this as a different system. I don't have an answer. We've not honestly put anything back to the practice. Probably we are developing smaller systems that can organize our things, that we don't waste time in doing the same things again and again. But that's the start only. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also had a following question to this, like regarding, since you said you grew from one person to a team, like a team, and also a set of informal contractors to maybe a more formalized set of contractors that you're working with. We have, like, I have, and maybe most of us have always heard that when architecture practice grows, the principal architect, like we see the role of a principal architect becomes more into organizing of things. So do you see that shift in your practice as of now, or maybe in coming years, that like the role of a principal architect gets more into organizing of things happening in the office rather than, you know, a more intense design oriented role?
I'd be honest, that is a ongoing fear every day. That sort of, and it's a fear that already you see a little transition where you are like more than spending time on the same thing by yourself only. There are people with you who are building with, and we are honestly, there is everybody in the office also designing as much as like we are discussing on the table. So everybody sort of, we gather for every project, we gather for an hour or two every day. We co-discuss, go back to, and basically yes, I won the role from the first project. It definitely has changed, and that will evolve. But also the kind of work that is coming to us is also very specific, that it's not going to be completely standardized ever. So unless we change the delivery of what we are doing altogether and we choose to do a different kind of work, that's not going to happen. And probably we'll not do as much work, but we will do as much as we can with the capacity we have. Yeah.
Am I audible? Yes, it's lovely, lovely project. And I just want to maybe CEPT, right? So, I mean, and you never wanted to be an architect or practice architecture. But, you know, in CEPT, you know, we were always, you know, focusing on that plans are generators of form. And there are this time of semesters of 12 months and 13 months and 5 years. And then as you progress through the pottery with 6 months, then your projects which are running now for like one project, as you mentioned, like 4 years, you know, 5 years, sometimes even maybe lesser also, hopefully. But how does this emerging of forms through, you know, through all these different practices and as evolving, and also the time, how does it correlate in some way in the thinking process or making of these forms come to life? Maybe architectural, maybe not, maybe other things. So does the time and the development of form and looking at site, looking at you know, the context, you know, how does it, you know, stir into this becoming this, you know, beautiful project you've just shown us?
It will take 4 years. So the whole anticipation is 18 to 24 months always. But some or the other thing goes wrong and we change set of contractors, and that's why the project goes on. And in Kamshat and Karjat, I think 6 months of monsoon takes away everything, and that's why the project goes longer. But I think the anticipation is never 4 years of project, for sure. To begin with, for any project I think that we've done. And it's just been sheer it's there, it's happened. But so nothing of the form sort of has come from there in that manner. And because all of these are sites that are very terrain and you have a lot of context of landscape around, and that sort of has given way to the form of if you're opening out the roof to something else, if you want to bring in light and things, that's the nature of why the form has arrived for sure. And I mean, I think when we were designing Karjat the first time, I was in Ahmedabad sitting in summer and designing, okay? I had never seen Kamshed or Karjat monsoon. And the design was already done, and we came here once before monsoon and at monsoon, and the wind was, like the rain was horizontal. It was not even like with the wind, it was going. We changed the whole thing because like we had very we had like a 4 feet, 3 feet overhang and everything, and then nothing of that worked actually. So we really went back, and because we saw, the first time we saw a site was in summer, which was brown and hot and everything else, and there was no anticipation of how the monsoon, because I'd never experienced. I knew that there is a heavy monsoon, but not like the wind is going to blow through everything, and those sort of things have informed how the forms and everything has come together.
No, because you're looking at the site also in various seasons, and you know, and the client these days, and even the corporate architecture offices, like 4 months one project has to be done, then 3 weeks may you have to,
But the design happens in the first 6 months. Everything else takes time.
Yes.
The design happens the first. But again, because the nature of these things, because they take so long, even the clients are not making decisions on everything day one. So 3 years down the line, right now, we're making decisions on fenestrations, because that's now where they've seen the space and they are imagining and they're feeling the space. So at every time things, as in the building is going on, with a private client, that changes. So, yeah.
No, no, this is not a question so much. It is a question, but I think I'm going to ask the most obvious thing that people will think I'm going to ask you, that I'm going to ask a gender question here, okay? Because I think it's really very, very interesting the way you presented, that you are not presenting from, the point of a definitive, this was my design and this is how I produced it, this is how it went, and that's how you would see, I would want to say, but like men architects presenting, and there's something about like how you present it as, it's about negotiation. It's almost like sharing a recipe with someone, and it's like, oh, thoda sa tadka, but like a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of fear, but also very interesting the way you spoke about like this idea of sharing with others, like asking somebody about a detail somewhere, something about, and I think that's a very interesting way of thinking of practice, that, you don't begin with a place of being absolutely sure, but you're kind of finding your way as you go along. And that's perhaps also this idea of a practice, of a discursive practice, otherwise becomes, about like questions, but there's a kind of, you're also discussing or designing with the community with you, So I think that's a very interesting, and you almost presented it almost in a matter of fact way, but I think there's something to learn from this kind of just process of working. But so I wanted to ask you, like, how difficult was it? You say you very easily said, oh, nano leke gaya to so many the site away, and we also come from a place where a lot of women just drop out because you have to, site is a big thing to negotiate, you have to go to and have to work from. But you're saying, oh, Luna leke idhar, so I mean it's. Again, and very matter-of-factly, you were saying all of this. So, but I just want to ask you, like, how was it? Was it, how difficult or how easy was it? Yeah.
I'll bring back to the emotional intelligence part again. That I think I got more aware of it when I did the course and read the emotional intelligence book, where, I would not want to make it gendered, but women do come with a little more sensitive. I'll read the room but not say it aloud, but there is a factor of emotional intelligence that I would agree that sort of adds in life for sure. But at the same time, I don't think there was a large issue with gender with all the work that we did, touch wood. But the first project we did, I think it was not more just the gender, it was also the age. I was like 23, 24 years old on site delegating work to somebody, like, "Tame ben su karyo like life ma? What have you done in life before that you're coming and delegating work to us?" So that was, I think, I was more not just gender but also the age, because I was going and telling things. And I think one very good thing my client did that time was, because these guys were not listening to me. It could have been gender and age, everything together. He started routing the money through me. He just did this for the ease of me being respected at that place, at that moment at least, that if he doesn't do work, he has to take the money from me. I mean, I have nothing to do with the money, I just have it to give him. But because if he didn't listen to me, I was not going to pay. So that is what my client helped me. I was only the first project where I actually faced that particular issue, because I was remote in Gujarat that time. And yeah, I mean, I also came from a place where I might have come out as I was confused. So I was all over the place while explaining. I mean, I have not done any brick mortar thing before in my life. So the way I would explain also was not how I know it and I know do this. So it came from that whole part of, I am learning, let's do this kind of a thing. So I was probably not taken seriously because of that. But that sort of money thing, and my client, to be honest, he was like, when I said we didn't even have a structural engineer on board, he had a little civil background. He was like, kya ho jayega, gir jayega na, main hu yahan pe. So that sort of encouraged, I mean, it's not about the gender here, but that was what sort of gave a lot of room for me to do things in the first 2 projects that we did here. And also when, like, that gender thing, I don't think that has, and a lot of, like Rajput, a lot of people have come, like the Potter studio I did, the textile studio I'm doing, they're all women who I'm working for also. A lot of our clients are also women who wanted women practitioners to build for them. So I think that was a very fresh, I mean, Rito, who we built the Potter studio for, she had a question in the beginning, can the contractor be a woman? I said, bhai, I cannot go and find a gendered thing for you. I am here, I can do this much that I can do. But I don't think that, at least the kind of people who I was working with, they all came from design backgrounds also. So that question was never really a big problem. Yeah.
I mean, there's something to be said about, like, also writing about design from your perspective. So I think I would encourage you to write.
It's audible. I echo everybody who said that. Thank you for taking us through your projects slowly. It's a pleasure to see them when one is kind of going through them slowly. And in your whole presentation, in your talk, you emphasized things about site, materiality, landscape, negotiating with different kinds of contractors in different places, so on and so forth. And I was wondering, because one sees the projects very slowly, are there other latent forces that seem to be influencing the projects that that one would want to engage with, in the sense that if one sees 2 kinds of responses. I'm just kind of trying to, I don't want to generalize, but in the second homes, and you started off with that, the client wanted the response to extend outside, so to make the space look huge, and that seems to be the architectural gesture that one sees across the second homes, not only in the projects that you do, but many other architects might be doing. And then there are the studios where there are in-between spaces, but there's also an inward-looking, intensive kind of space that the studio focuses on. One sees these 2 kinds of gestures. So if we start are there other architectural projects that these projects are in conversation with? Are there precedents that you are learning from? Are there latent influences of places that you've lived in, or people whose work you've come across that seem to be influencing, some of the responses that we see over here? And is there an innovation in that? I mean, is there innovation in terms of something a development from the precedents that one comes across?
For both the Potter Studio, I think Golden Bridge was a key space because we spent a lot of time, not just saw it, but I have spent 7 months being there. And I think both those spaces really, that space itself, like the architecture is not similar at all, but it was about how one transits from one place to the other and how one does what where. I think that sort of, that whole, one, like as an activity, like an organization plan if you call, what you're doing across that space sort of really influenced how we were looking at the two projects for sure, like how everything works one after the other. So I don't know if, I mean, not to say we definitely look up things and all that, but not specifically one particular kind of work and things, but I think these are all coming out of more responses from who they are as people also. Like Aarti, whose house we've done here, I mean, I had just gone when we had done the handover, and she said this, I mean, it can be a very romantic way of saying it, that people have come to the house and said that it feels like your house. And I think there was a whole, like, I know her as a person and how she sort of spends her day and what she'd like and how she'd move around the whole day. And I think things then came out from that also, and not as typological precedents of kinds. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, do we have any more questions from the audience? We're just checking our live stream. If no questions, okay. Can we? Thank you, Naomi, for being so generous with everything, with and responding to the questions from the audience. And it was a big, for me at least, it was a lot to learn from, especially from somebody who is very interested in making and then setting up the process for sort of each project itself. And I think all of us are taking a lot from this talk, and there's a lot that we can reflect on, and I'm sure that a few of us will also write to you and follow up on the presentation as well. I would like to thank everyone for also being here, present, and engaging with Naomi's work. We will meet again on the 4th of September. And in the next talk, we have Sonal Mithal in conversation with Prasad Khanolkar. And her talk is titled Elemental Coalitions. So I hope to see you and a lot more of your friends here in the next time as well. So thank you. I think we can close today.